There is a number on the Tesco shelf you are not meant to think too carefully about. It sits above the Clubcard price in smaller text. It is the regular price, the rate without the card, and it is the engine of one of the most profitable pricing mechanisms in British retail. Which did the calculation? They compared the regular price against a fair market baseline and found inflation of up to 84% on individual products. Sainsbury's figures produced the same pattern. The Competition and Markets Authority agreed. Tesco's unit pricing display no longer looks the same. This is why. The Clubcard launched in 1995 and changed British supermarket shopping permanently. The pitch was straightforward. Shop at Tesco, accumulate points, receive vouchers, save money. For 3 decades that proposition held. Millions of households registered for the card and carried it without giving the underlying mechanics particular thought. It was the background infrastructure of the weekly shop, as unremarkable as the trolley or the self-checkout lane. You used it because not using it felt like leaving money on the table. That framing was deliberate. It was also the foundation on which the problem was built. The dual pricing model that Tesco eventually constructed around the card is, on the surface, architecturally simple. Every product in the relevant category carries 2 prices. The Clubcard price, available to any registered member at no cost, and the regular price, the rate charged to customers presenting no card. The regular price sits above the Clubcard rate on the shelf label. It is the reference point. The saving is calculated from it. The loyalty reward is expressed as the gap between the 2 numbers, stated in pence and often in percentage terms. The system appears transparent because both numbers are visible. Customers reading those labels operated on a reasonable assumption. The regular price was the real price. It represented what the product cost in a competitive market, arrived at through supplier negotiation, margin calculation, and the ordinary pressures of grocery retail. The Clubcard price was a reduction applied on top of that baseline, made possible by the value Tesco extracted from loyalty data and the commercial scale of its registered membership. That is what the structure of the label implied. Regulators oversee these companies. Legal teams write the pricing terms. None of that is done carelessly. Customers had every rational reason to trust that the regular price meant what it appeared to mean. The mechanism of the problem sits precisely there. Not in the Clubcard price itself, which may or may not represent a genuine saving in absolute terms, but in the regular price above it, the baseline from which the saving is calculated and expressed. If that regular price is artificially elevated above what fair and competitive market conditions would produce, then the discount is not a discount in any meaningful sense. It is a presentation. The customer is shown a gap between 2 numbers and invited to read the gap as their reward. What they are not told is whether the upper number was engineered to make that gap appear larger than the market alone would have produced it. Which began examining this question with a methodology built to be difficult to argue with. The consumer group established a fair baseline price for individual products. This was not a figure invented for rhetorical effect. It was calculated by examining the prices of comparable products across the wider grocery market, accounting for product specification, retailer positioning, and the prices at which equivalent items were sold without any loyalty card requirement. The fair baseline represented what a reasonable competitive market, absent loyalty pricing mechanics, would be expected to produce for a given item. It was the number against which the Tesco regular price could be measured honestly. The comparison produced findings that did not admit of an innocent interpretation. On individual products, the regular shelf price, the number displayed above the Clubcard rate, was found to be inflated by between 72 and 84% above what the fair baseline indicated. 72 to 84%. That is not a marginal discrepancy produced by a pricing model operating at the outer edge of normal commercial parameters. It is not the kind of variance attributable to rounding differences, regional pricing variation, or minor differences in product. Specification. It is the kind of number that requires deliberate construction to produce and sustain. Which's investigation did not stop at Tesco. Sainsbury's Nectar pricing produced a parallel pattern when submitted to the same scrutiny. The mechanism differed in its specific configuration, but not in its structure or its effect. A regular shelf price elevated above fair market baseline, a loyalty price set beneath it, a saving shown to the customer in figures and percentage terms at the moment of purchase. Sainsbury's and Tesco are not peripheral operators testing an unusual pricing model in a single product category. They are the two largest grocery retailers in Britain, together accounting for a market share representing tens of millions of weekly shopping transactions. The practice, which, documented, was not an experiment. It was embedded. The question the investigation placed clearly on the record was not whether the Clubcard price was low in absolute terms. It was whether the regular price above it was honest. Those are not the same question. The industry had spent considerable effort making sure that only the first was ever publicly discussed. The unit pricing overhaul Tesco implemented under regulatory pressure changed what customers see when they stand in front of a shelf label. Unit prices, the cost per 100 grams or per litre, are now displayed with greater prominence and consistency across the estate. That change matters because unit pricing is the tool that makes comparison honest. It strips away the framing of the loyalty mechanic and reduces the product to its actual cost per measurable quantity. A customer who reads the unit price can compare across brands, across pack sizes, and across retailers without needing to first establish whether the regular price above the Clubcard rate is a real number or a constructed one. The overhaul gave customers the instrument they needed. The fact that a regulator had to require it is the part that does not disappear. What the overhaul implicitly acknowledged was precise. The previous display had not provided customers with sufficient information to make genuinely informed price comparisons. That is the formulation the regulatory process produced. Read it carefully. Insufficient information to make genuinely informed comparisons is not a description of a system that was working and needed a minor adjustment. It is a description of a system that was structurally inadequate for the purpose it claimed to serve. Tesco's pricing display, as it existed before the CMA intervention, did not give customers what they needed to evaluate whether the Clubcard saving was real. It gave them two numbers and a gap, and left them to conclude that the gap was their reward. The coldest number in this case is not the 84% inflation figure, striking as that is. It is the per household figure that emerges when the overcharge on individual products is extended across a year of routine shopping. A household buying loyalty-gated products weekly across the product categories, where documented the largest inflation and trusting the regular price as a fair reference point, will have paid materially more than a fair market baseline would have required. The precise figure varies by household composition and shopping pattern. What does not vary is the direction. Every affected transaction moved in one direction only, away from the customer and toward the retailer, by an amount the customer had no practical means of identifying without performing the calculation, which eventually performed on their behalf. Deliberate absence is the correct analytical frame for what happened. A pricing system does not sustain 84% inflation above fair market baseline across thousands of product lines at two of Britain's largest grocery retailers over an extended period because nobody in the pricing function checked. These are organizations with revenue modeling infrastructure of considerable sophistication. The regular price on a loyalty-gated shelf label is not a residual output that nobody examined. It is a deliberate input into a system designed to produce a specific commercial result. The absence of a prompt to customers explaining how the regular price was set was not an oversight. It was the condition the model required to function. Pricing opacity in grocery retail is not a malfunction. It is a structural feature of a market in which the complexity of loyalty mechanics, promotional cycles, multi-pack pricing, and unit price variation creates an environment that most customers cannot fully interrogate in real time at the shelf. That complexity is not accidental. It is maintained because it is commercially advantageous to the retailer and because it persists until a regulator or a court forces the arithmetic into the open. The CMA forced it open in this instance. The which investigation made that intervention possible. Neither should have been necessary if the pricing had been honest. The practical position for customers now is specific. When you stand in front of a shelf label carrying both a Clubcard price and a regular price, the question to ask is not how large the gap is. The gap is the number Tesco wants you to read. The question is whether the regular price, the upper number from which your saving is calculated, reflects what the product genuinely costs in a competitive market. The unit price, now displayed more prominently, gives you the tool to begin answering that. Check it against the unit price of a comparable product at a competitor. Check it against the same product sold without a loyalty card requirement. The receipt, read line by line rather than glanced at for a total, tells you what you actually paid, not what you saved. The loyalty scheme model is not specific to Tesco and Sainsbury's. Every major British grocery retailer operates some version of dual pricing or loyalty-gated promotional rates, the which. Investigation and the CMA's response concerned two specific operators and a specific documented practice. It did not clear the rest of the market. The structural incentive that produced inflated regular prices at Tesco and Sainsbury's exists wherever a retailer can express a saving as a percentage of a reference price it sets itself, without an independent mechanism requiring that reference price to reflect genuine market conditions. The overhaul happened here. The incentive did not go away. That moment at the till. The Clubcard scanned. The green light. The figure appearing on screen telling you what you saved. The quiet satisfaction of a system working in your favor. That was not a reward for loyalty. It was a price that had been built to look like one, set at a level designed to make the gap beneath it feel like something you had earned. You were not a valued customer in that moment. You were the arithmetic,